welcome back. Last week we talked about Ranganathan's 5 laws of library science and discussed what it means for the library collection to be a growing organism. We also learned about the importance and some of the mechanics of a collection development plan. In this lecture, I will be discussing a collection management policy. Now, the plan can be part of the policy, but I see it as more detailed, library-specific, whereas the policy is going to be a document that covers policies that guide decisions and operations of the library. The plan talks about goals and has specific details about the library that it covers, whereas the policy can be a document that can be district-wide and cover all of the school libraries within a district. And this way it ensures that practices across the libraries are consistent and that you're all on the same page in regard to various parts of policies, which we'll talk about further on. So before we go any further, let's talk about the terms collection development and collection management. In a sense, they mean the same thing. But I prefer to use the term collection management instead of development because development implies growth. And not all collections should grow. As I mentioned in the previous lecture, there are many factors which impact collections, and some of those factors require that collections actually diminish or eliminate, or are eliminated. Sometimes they'll need to stay the same size. So it's important to think in terms of management of a collection, what goes in it, what comes out of it, how the resources are maintained, how they're accessed, rather than just the idea of development or growing a collection. So let's take a look at the theological underpinnings of a collection management policy. So the collection management policy is a school board or school-based decision-making council approved document that guides the decisions of library media specialists as well as the functions and procedures of the library. It states the mission of the library, the purpose of the library and the purpose that the library and LMS, the library media specialists, serve, and provides continuity across libraries in the district as well as across time and personnel changes. So somebody new coming into the library will understand why certain things are in place, why things are done the way that they're done. In essence, it's a blueprint or guidelines for making decisions that have to do with the who, what, where, when, why, and how of the library and the library media specialist. Additionally, it allows for transparency. It's a public document that's available to anyone that anyone who reads will know what the library is about. Some important uses of the collection management policy are to help guide planning and decision making, as well as material selection. Importantly, it serves as a means of protection should questions be raised about decisions and actions. Often we don't think about the need for that. When we think about libraries, we often think that people love libraries and they're going to appreciate the work that we do. However, there are often times when people are not happy about decisions that library media specialists have made, resources that they've added to the collection, resources that they don't add to the collection. Various types of things that should be covered under the policy, and that's why it's important to have a policy in place so that you can point to the policy and say, this is why I made the decision. It's not arbitrary. It's not to single you out. It's a policy that has been thought through and has been approved, and therefore the policy, in a sense, has your back. So the questions about who, what, where, when, how, and why should be able to be answered by the collection management policy. So let's talk about some of those that would be covered under that. So the who part of it. So the collection management policy will cover who we're collecting for. It should have demographics of the community that we serve so that we have an idea of a picture of the population that we are collecting for. Who will we purchase from? Often decisions need to be made on a district level about what vendors to use, and or if there's consortial agreements, and that should be clarified in the policy. Who makes the final decision about selection and deselection? And it's important to spell that out again so that when questions come up, you'll be able to point to the correct person or governing body that can answer concerns about materials that have been added or that are maybe being deselected from the resource or from the library collection. The what part of it. So what types of resources will we collect? Clearly, libraries are going to collect books, but we need to answer the question about will we be collecting manipulatives? Will we be collecting materials that will be used in the classroom? Those sorts of decisions should be covered by the policy. What level of coverage will we try to achieve? We will talk further about analyzing our collection, and part of the analysis or evaluation process is to understand how deep we're going to go in areas of the collection in different subject areas or different specialty areas. If we do collect, for instance, if we do collect materials for classroom support for teachers to use, how thorough of a collection are we going to get? Are we and you know what part of the collection development budget is going to be set aside for those types of materials, as opposed to resources that would be for supporting students? So those sorts of questions need to be answered by the policy. What formats are we going to provide access to? Will we be collecting electronic resources? If so, or if not, why not? Should we be collecting DVDs of popular movies? If so, we need to answer those questions. And then what criteria will we be using for evaluating, adding, and weeding the collection? Some of the questions under where is where will we keep the resources? Often libraries have more than one collection. There is often a reference collection, an audiovisual collection, a separate collection for materials that can be checked out. But oftentimes there will be libraries that choose to interfile the AV materials with the books. They may decide that a reference collection in print doesn't need to exist because many of the materials that they need for that collection are available through electronic resources. So questions about how the library will be organized and laid out and where things will go should be answered in the policy. Also, some libraries choose to have special collections that are need to go through the library media specialist to get to, whether the materials are sensitive or costly. Some libraries may put those materials behind the circulation desk and will need to have permission to access those. So those sorts of things should be in the policy. And where are electronic resources housed? Some electronic resources need to be downloaded onto a server, and if so, who will be controlling that server? Or will the decision be made that no electronic resources will be collected that need to be downloaded onto a server? These sorts of things are covered by the collection management policy. Under when, policies should have a timeline in them that determine how often the policy shall be looked at and evaluated and revised. Sorry, that's the dog. Another question that the policy should answer is how often the collections will be inventoried. Often that is done on a rotating basis, and it's good to have a certain schedule for when the collections will be inventoried. And also would be when are the collections evaluated or assessed. That can happen in conjunction with the inventory or at a separate time. So the policy should answer the question, why are we collecting resources? This is a more broad or theoretical answer, but often it will guide decisions that need to be made when you're determining whether to select a resource or not. And then how will the collections be organized? As I mentioned before, we could have multiple collections, and it's good to make decisions about that, if there will be multiple collections, and how they will be organized, how the resources will be purchased. Some districts require that the purchasing go through the district level, while others will allow libraries to send their own purchase orders into vendors, and so those sorts of things need to be spelled out in the collection management policy. How will access be provided? So if we do have electronic resources, who's responsible for making sure that there's access to those resources? And how will challenges be handled? Sometimes people are not happy with the materials that we choose to collect in our collections, and so there needs to be a process in place to be able to facilitate a person being able to voice their concern and have that concern be addressed. And then how the collection will be assessed as well should be answered. And these are just, a few of the things that should be answered by the collection management policy. I just kind of wanted to flesh it out a little bit so you could kind of understand what I was talking about. Now, the Kentucky Department of Education developed a library media program rubric, which serves as an evaluation tool for school libraries. And I have a link to that in the LiveGuide under the Standards tab, if you'd like to take a look at the full rubric. But under Section 5, under Building the Learning Environment, it addresses policies and states, the school library media program includes policies, procedures, and guidelines that support equitable access to ideas and information throughout the school community. So it is very important to not just have this policy in your head, but have a policy in place that somebody can come along and read, and that can be referred to whenever decisions need to be made. Some of the goals of the policies are they should reflect input from appropriate members of the school community. So if you have that school board or the school-based decision committee, they should be part of the providing input, as well as teachers, parents, and also students. They should demonstrate compliance with approved selection and purchasing policies that the district has put in place. They should also include acceptable use of technology. So often libraries have computers available for students to use, and it's important to have in that policy a statement about how those computers are to be used, what sorts of sites are to be accessed, all that sort of thing. The policy should also promote ethical use of information. That's one of the tenets of the ethics of librarianship, is to make sure that we are guiding our users to use information ethically. It should also establish procedures for the equitable circulation of library materials and reflect appropriate uses of library spaces and resources. So libraries are more than just the collections. There are going to be spaces, as I mentioned, there could be computers available for use, there could be study room space, there could be space that people want to use perhaps after school is out for a meeting room. So it's important to have information about how that space is going to be used as part of the goal. There's, as I mentioned previously, one of the goals should include a reconsideration policy for challenged materials. And then this document, as I mentioned before, is available from the Standards tab in the LiveGuide, and also from the link on this slide. I'm not sure, though, if you can click on that link through Tegrity. So I'm going to give you a minute to read this slide. One of the important elements of the collection management policy, sorry, I can't read, is the responsibility of school librarians to support intellectual freedom through access to information. The American Library Association, which is the parent body of the American Association of School Libraries, feels so strongly about intellectual freedom that as a means of ensuring a democratic society that they have an Office of Intellectual Freedom and many documents, policies, and resources regarding intellectual freedom at that website. I've provided links to several of the resources on the Find Policies and Policy Readings tab of the LibGuide. In fact, let me show you where those are. So this is the LibGuide, and this is the Find Policies and Policy Readings tab. And if you go look under my box, the box with my face in it, you'll find the intellectual freedom resources there. And these are very important documents to be familiar with, to know what they say, because as a library media specialist, you're expected to uphold, especially the Library Bill of Rights. That's important. So be sure and go to this tab and become familiar with those resources and what they read them and find out what they support and what they're all about. Okay. So as you can see from these two statements, the American Library Association affirms that it's not the right or responsibility of librarians, library media specialists, or governing body of libraries to take on the responsibilities that parents have in regard to their children's access to information. So we're not the gatekeepers for children. Their parents are. And further, the Supreme Court has also expressed some opinions about the right of children to access information. The 14th Amendment, and I'm quoting now from Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. The 14th Amendment, as now applied to the states, protects the citizens against the state itself and all of its creatures, boards of education not accepted. These have, of course, important, delicate, and highly discretionary functions, but none that they may not perform within the limits of the Bill of Rights. That they are educating the young for citizenship is reason for scrupulous protection of constitutional freedoms of the individual. If we are not to strangle the free mind at its source and teach youth to discount important principles of our government as mere platitudes. I think from that statement you can understand the importance of intellectual freedom and making sure that we don't constrain the resources that children have access to. Also from Supreme Court Justice Abe Fortas in Tinker versus Des Moines Community School District. He says it can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. In our system, students may not be regarded as closed-circuit recipients of only that which the state chooses to communicate. It is, however, the responsibility of library media specialists to provide access to information that is free, equal, and equitable from a variety of viewpoints that enrich the quality and diversity of thought and expression, that provide for the interest, information, and enlightenment of their community, regardless of content, approach, or format. Additionally, it's important to remember that the library media specialist or the governing board of the library do not need to endorse, agree with, or approve every idea or presentation that they make available. And materials should not be selected or removed based on political, moral, or aesthetic standards. And one of the reasons, among many, that we do this is that we want to encourage library-long learners, actually that should be lifelong learners, who are informed, literate, educated, and culturally enriched. A person's right to use the library and the library's resources should not be denied because of their origin, their age, their background, or their views. And finally, the library media specialist serves as a protector of individuals' rights to privacy and confidentiality in the use of library resources and services, as well as their right to freely express their opinions about library resources and services. So again, the library media specialist does not serve as a gatekeeper of resources. However, they do serve as a protector of rights. I think that's the important thing to distinguish. So now let's discuss some of the parts that a collection development policy should include in order to serve the library media specialist. And I've divided these things by different parts of the body. So these are the heart part. The mission statement, the purpose statement, a community profile, and a collection description. So Kimmel states that, quote, the purpose of the school library collection should be so deeply embedded in the learning mission of the school that developing the collection in isolation would be meaningless. So we must understand that the collection is not an end. It is a means to an end. I think that this reflects well the first two laws of library science, every reader his book and every book his reader. So the collection management policy should have a mission statement. Now, the library can choose to have their own mission statement, and of course that mission statement will be in support of the school's mission statement, or they can just choose to adopt the school's mission statement for their own. Having a purpose statement is also helpful, especially if the school's mission statement has been adopted. Then it's important for the library to have a purpose statement that will show its support of the school's mission statement. In terms of a community profile, if the collection management policy is a district policy, it'll have sort of a broad description of the community served by all the schools in the district. And it's really important then in the collection development plan to have, for each library, to have their own community profile. Because the specific community served by a specific school may be different than another school in the same district. So it's important that the community served by the school and the school library is understood and sort of spelled out in that collection management policy. And then the collection, we should talk about the scope of the collection. Not necessarily where you're at, but where you want to be. How the ideal collection for this community in this school should look, and sort of the community that you're trying to the goal you're trying to reach. The brains part are should talk about responsibility, decision making, cooperative collection development, and selection criteria. So who is responsible for making collection management decisions? Ideally, that would be the role of the library media specialist, but I am well aware that there may be some library action committees that actually make those final decisions about what will be selected, the material resources that will be part of the library's collections. In terms of decision making, that would be explaining who has oversight of all that. So often that's going to be the board or the, and Kentucky has they don't necessarily have school boards. They have these community boards, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So that is often the body that has oversight of decision making. That oversight might also be from the library committee, and so this policy will talk about the makeup of that committee, and also it should talk about how input from the community, such as teachers, parents, and students, can be received, and how it should be addressed. If there are cooperative agreements with other school districts, public libraries in the area, or other libraries in the area, in the district, so other school libraries, these should be spelled out in the collection management policy as well. And then listing out the selection criteria. the factors that would serve to include something in the collection and the factors that would serve to not include things. So, for instance, languages. If you have a significant population of Spanish-speaking students in your school, you would be well served to include some Spanish language materials and resources in addition to English language. Some classes request their students to read certain books, and so then it would be wise to have multiple copies for those sorts of things. But you may not want to have multiple copies of other resources that wouldn't find the same sort of level of use. So I've listed a few of the selection criteria that you would want to include in your policy to help decision making when it comes to choosing materials to select. And then we'll talk about the arms and legs of the collection management policy, and these are sort of the more practical, getting at the meat of what we do policies. So this part of the policy addresses the actions of managing a collection, such as who is responsible for the acquisitions process, how to deal with gifts, recommendations, challenges, and weeding, how the collections will be organized. Will a classification system be used? Probably, I'm guessing. And if so, which one? Often libraries use Dewey, but there has been some articles in the literature that talk about organizing libraries more like bookstores. So when we get to the organizing part of this course, we'll talk more about that. And then how will electronic resources be organized and accessed, and who's responsible for keeping the technology up to date and in working condition? And then preservation. Will materials be mended, or will you attempt to replace those materials? So, and then finally the policy revision cycles. There should be a timeline for revising the policy on a regular basis. A well thought out collection management policy serves as a guiding foundation to all of the work a library media specialist does to manage and organize the library's collection. Writing and revising the policy should be informed by assessments made on the community, the curriculum, and the collection in order to understand the community that's being served and the information needs that the library's collection should be meeting, and whether the collection is meeting those needs or not. So next week we are going to discuss the importance of these assessments and how to do them. So we'll be talking about context meaning the setting in which we do the work that we do, and that context is going to be community, curriculum, and collection, the 3 C's. Oh, and I do want to talk a bit about the readings. Again, you can go to the LibGuide. The link is under Texts and Resources module, and under Find Policies and Policy Readings, you'll see I have a list of policies that I've linked out to, so you can take a look at other collection management policies, as well as there's some action plans, some selection policies. So different types of policies that guide. I'm talking about the collection management policy as a whole, but it could be that that policy is broken down into some different policies. So take a look at some of those policies, and then I've got a list of readings here and resources for you to take a look at. And I'll mention again these intellectual freedom resources. Make sure you familiarize yourself with those. All right, we'll see you